You're listening to The Back 40, the podcast for Ontario farmers, covering topics and issues that matter most to Ontario agriculture. Brought to you by Trillium Mutual Insurance, bringing the ag community together one podcast at a time. I'm the host of The Back 40, Mike Bryan, agribusiness specialist at Trillium Mutual Insurance. Today on the Back 40, we're speaking with the fresh air farmer, Andrew Campbell. Many of you will know him. He's all over Facebook and Twitter. He is an award-winning communicator and a much sought-after keynote speaker. Grew up on a dairy farm in Ontario and went away to school to become an ag broadcaster. Before a few years ago, he returned back to the dairy farm. He is one of the top ag influencers in Ontario. Andrew, welcome to the Back 40.
Thanks very much for having me, Mike.
So, Andrew, your main occupation is a dairy farmer, but you've got an awful lot of stuff that you're into in the social media and the keynote speaking. And I seem to recall that my own father got out of the dairy farming industry when I was 4 because he was finding it way too much work to keep up with, and he went into the hog industry instead. Don't you find that you have enough to do milking cows without adding the social media all to that as well?
Well, I'm not bored around here. Let's just say that, Mike. That certainly is one of the things around here. But, it is one of those things when you talk about the social media perspective, especially the stuff that, when we're just sharing the stuff about what we're doing around the farm, we're sharing as we work. I'm sure there is no possible way I could do all of this if I had, big cameras and big videotapes and technology that is 30 or 40 years old. But the fact that I've got all the stuff I need basically in my smartphone makes at least kind of the first couple of steps pretty easy because it's with me all the time anyway. And then we just kind of share based on that.
Yeah, carrying your own broadcasting studio in your pocket is something that 30 years ago we never thought we'd be able to do.
Well, and it is amazing from even when I went to school, which, I always think is, not very long ago, but it gets longer and longer ago as I keep going. But it was a case of here you had a backpack full of tape and recorders and mics, and then you had to bring it back. And of course, you had to do it on a computer with the big wide screens. And there was a lot to it. Whereas now, even from a broadcast perspective, and especially in the era of a pandemic, you've seen whole TV shows done with iPhones and Android phones that have just gone live on national networks. So the fact if it's good enough for them, then man, it must be good enough for us to post to Twitter too, I think.
You spend a lot of time on social media. You're one of the best advocates that we have for the agricultural industry there. So where do you get your inspiration for what you post?
It's probably been, for me, Mike, one of those things of evolution, really, because, what I would have thought was good and what I should have posted even 5 years ago, especially 10 years ago, is very different from the types of things that I'm posting and talking about and sharing now. The reality that I've come to realize and understand is that fact that we talk about in the industry a lot is that less than 2% of us farm, which means 98+% don't farm, don't know a whole lot about farms, don't get to experience farm animals or, crops growing or big equipment or kind of all the things that are really day to day to us. What I've kind of learned over this journey is to get away from the, what I first, would be posting about, I would like to teach you something. Lesson 1. Show picture. That's not the way I go about that anymore. It really is much more about here's what the kids and I did today. Here's a picture of them doing something. Here's a video of me doing something. And that's all there is to it. Now you have a connection with a farmer. And if you have questions, you can ask me, or, hopefully at least that relationship has kind of been built from a virtual perspective that they can say, yeah, I saw that from a farm. He doesn't seem like too bad a guy. So maybe I won't believe everything I read online. That's really the concept and the idea behind it.
Our industry faces a bit of a dichotomy from that standpoint of that farmers are some of the most trusted people that you're going to run across, and yet people have a tendency to distrust industrial agriculture.
Very much so. That's been a statistic that I've used in workshops and keynotes for a very long time. And, the number at one time, I haven't seen the updated numbers for a couple of years, but, at one time was that 85 to 90% of people trust farmers, but it fell to like about 50% had a positive impression of agriculture. we in the industry put agriculture and farming together. They're the same thing to all of us. But I think it does go to, as you say, that perception of kind of the more industrial version being agriculture, and the more, small scale, family oriented, hard working aspect that is the farmer. So it really is just about, our job and our role is trying to figure out, okay, is there a way, can we try to bridge that, to bring some of that trust to agriculture, and to the thought of what agriculture is, and vice versa, bring that agriculture up because the people talking about it are so trusted.
Everybody worries about the corporate farm, and yet more and more what we see is the family farm is a corporate farm. Like, just because you've incorporated, there's all sorts of good reasons to do that, from liability and tax purposes there. That's what your family farm is.
Well, and I actually remember having this conversation with a reporter from one of the big national newspapers. This is going a few years back. And the angle that this reporter was going on at the time was very much that the family dairy farm was basically dead and dying. Therefore, supply management wasn't doing its job, because look, I have the stats and look at how many corporate dairy farms there are. And it was actually a pretty short conversation, because all of a sudden that angle didn't work when I said, well, but who owns that corporation? Like, you're a financial reporter. You understand the difference between paying 15% tax or 30% tax. Which do you think we're doing? And the conversation was over, but it took that step to say, just because the word corporate is in front of it doesn't mean what you think in your head it means. It just means, a lawyer was involved when they signed a few forms, and now the taxes get filed a little differently.
Yeah,
that's it.
It's a different farm structure, but it has very, very little to do with what happens on the farm on a day-to-day basis.
Well, and I think it also does go to that point of, both from the liabilities perspective, from the tax perspective, from even working through what are more and more complicated transition and succession plans nowadays. When you've got, more family members, more money involved, all of those things, the industry has just kind of latched on and has progressively moved towards that because it works for a lot of people. It just takes us having that conversation to say, just because you've heard that a corporate farm or this farm has turned into a corporation really doesn't mean anything, because the shareholders are probably just all the family anyway.
We have new technology, we have new genetics, we have new ways of doing things, we have new farm structures. It all fits in together as we look at a more modern farming landscape. A lot of people, though, still think of the farmer in the overalls with the straw hat and the pitchfork right there.
Well, and that goes back to that kind of trust perspective. Like, if you go into Google right now and type in farmer and search for images, it's not going to be what you and I probably think of as a farmer. It is going to be that older white man, straw hat, plaid, overalls, all that kind of stuff, because that's just what people think of when they think of a farmer. It's amazing the number of times that, obviously pandemic time now, I don't do it very often, but, I might go do a workshop and hop on an airplane still in a suit and have a conversation with the person beside me and say, oh, well, I'm a farmer. And they say, well, you don't look like a farmer. Well, yeah, I don't have my overalls on right now, but we do have other clothes we wear sometimes. But it opens up that conversation to say, what you think of a farmer, actually, some of it might be true, but a lot of it is actually probably the exact same thing that you think of when you think of your own friends or your own family. Every farmer has different interests. Every farmer dresses differently. Every farmer has different values, votes for a different political party, all these types of things. And it just takes somebody meeting a farmer and having that conversation, or seeing a farmer and having that conversation, to say, oh, wait a minute, they think and value the same things I do. Therefore, what I had as my preconceived notion, maybe that's not so true. Maybe I have to rethink that. And that's really what so much of the goal is about.
Yeah, and a lot of the problem, as you mentioned, like less than 2% of us, depending on your stats, less than 1% of us are farmers anymore. And we're generations that are removed from the farm. My in-laws were from Mississauga, and I don't know that my father-in-law was ever involved in agriculture. My mother-in-law was one generation off the farm, and they didn't know a whole lot about what was involved in modern farming. Not that they weren't open to it, but they didn't know a lot about it. How do we reach those people? For me, it was easy because I had a conversation with them on a regular basis. But how do we reach those people that don't have that connection?
Well, really, I think so much of it is about going to where they are already. I think we have this great high hope in agriculture that people will seek out information about farmers or about food production. And if they seek it out, they'll, really go first to the great farm source, and that's fine. That doesn't happen very often. I think what we have to do is we have to be open to say, okay, how can we go to places that they are to have those conversations with them? I think, for me, that's where social media does fit kind of nicely, is that, people are in those spaces already. They're already on Instagram. They're already on Facebook. They're already on YouTube. How can I try to get some of the things that I post kind of in their feed? And I know a lot of other farmers are doing some great things in that same sense, trying to connect with that. But then, I always say that social media isn't the be all and end all with this. Some of it is just having conversations with the people around you or volunteering for an organization, because the other thing about so much of this is we do tend to think that, oh, well, the people from Mississauga, they're the ones that we need to talk to the most, when I have a feeling that there's a pile of people in, Listowel that don't necessarily know a whole lot about the farms around them. And so is there even some opportunity that we can have the conversation with people in our church, people we golf with, people we play hockey with, all these types of things, and, volunteer for some of the ag in the classroom stuff for schools, because I see it, even down here, kind of Strathroy, Glencoe, down kind of in our neck of the woods is, how many people, come up and say, oh, I never even, realized this. And you've been my neighbor, you've been my friend for a very long time, and I never even knew this. So I think we just have to be open to have a conversation, however we're comfortable doing it.
Yeah, I've been in a classroom with high school students in downtown Stratford, and it's amazing the number of kids that you get there that really don't know anything about agriculture. And I mean, it's a city, but it's in the middle of some of the most active agricultural area we're going to find anywhere in Ontario. And 90% of the kids can't pick out what soybeans, wheat, barley is. They don't know. They've never seen it before, and they really don't have any idea what they're looking at.
No, and that's what we have to do. We do have to really think of is, and put ourselves in their shoes too, is what kind of exposure would they have? Yes, they drive between Stratford and Waterloo, once a week and drive by some things, but there's no signs that says this is a dairy farm, this is soybeans, this is, all that kind of stuff. And if you go kind of around their circle of friends, it's probably people who are in a similar boat with, parents that might be commuting to and from, a job either in a town like Stratford or, into the city. The same thing here. There's lots of people that drive back and forth into London to go to work. So it is one of those things that, just because they've come to the country because of, more affordable housing, they want to be out of the city. Maybe it's a town between two places that the parents are working, whatever the reason, it's probably not because they have a great passion for grain farms. And so we kind of have to take some responsibility to say, you're my neighbor, you're new to this area, you're new to this community, or maybe you've even been here for a long time. Let's have a conversation about what I do, and then reciprocate that and be very interested in what they're doing too, and learn from, their values and their ideas, so you can better understand who that end consumer is in, within Ontario.
In many ways, we've kept what's happened on the farm to be kind of a closed door, and from biosecurity standpoint, that's a reasonable way. We don't want to have people tracking diseases onto our livestock operations and such, but we've been very afraid to let people see what goes on when you do drive in the driveway there. We're starting to see that change, not just with people visiting farms and being more open there, but the opportunity through social media, the same that you do, that you can post, as you did, post a picture of the farm every day for a year and let people see what actually does go on the farm.
Well, and too, there's lots of other things. I know, Farm and Food Care does those virtual farm tours that they have on their website, Farm Food
Yep.
360. Those are some really cool resources that I know even we get a kick out of it. Even the kids get a kick out of doing because, yeah, we're from a dairy farm and we have grain farm, and some of the kids might have a chicken farmer friend, but it's not like they go inside that barn. It's not like there's this huge connection. So it's even interesting for us to see that. So we can even pass on some of those tools that exist for people.
Do you like what you're hearing from the Back 40? We'd like to hear from you. Send us an email with your comments and thoughts to theback40@trilliummutual.com or follow us on social media @Trillium Mutual.
I think the other reality, if I look back even 10 years ago, is this was never something that we thought we had to do. People went to the grocery store, they bought on sale, and tasted good was basically their only qualification they had for food. They weren't asking questions. And we as farmers were just kind of head down, get our work done. And now that has kind of rolled, and part of it is kind of the dawn of internet and social media and people getting information that is not correct, that is not factual, has kind of put us in a corner that says, oh, wait a minute, we should take this seriously and actually have some of these conversations too. And it takes time and it takes a certain amount of comfort. And certainly, I know it's not for everyone, but for those that do it, it's important. You see somebody else doing it. I always chuckle at, Dad here even. Here I am laying on the ground trying to get a different angle of a picture. And I'm sure there are days he's saying, like, can you just get up and get this done? But at the same time, knows full well the importance of it. So even though he's not going to do that in 100 years, didn't take long to kind of bring along and say, yeah, this is important for you to take that 5 minutes in this spot to get what you need so that then the story can be told a little better. So there's a lot of moving parts to that, but the biggest one is just the importance of actually having those conversations.
Yeah, and when you say conversations, it's not just about telling our story and getting our side of the story out there. It's also, if we're having that conversation and we're engaging with them, we need to hear what their concerns are as well. Because as you said, like it used to be what's on sale and what tastes good, and now it's what tastes good and how was it raised and where did it come from? And those things are far more important than what they were 15, 20 years ago.
And they're growing in importance for more and more consumers, and more check boxes are being asked of us in terms of what was the labor situation like? Were these people paid well? What were the working conditions? What's the environmental sustainability? What's the animal care? Antibiotics, no antibiotics. Pesticide, no pesticide. There's just so many things that we can't possibly say anymore that my way's the right way, accept it and you'll be happy. That doesn't work because there are so many things people are interested in. Instead, as you say, that conversation piece, that going, okay, what is concerning or what is interesting to you? I'll tell you how I think that's important. I'll listen to those concerns, share about some of the things that we do on our farm, and then take it from a perspective of, and this is another hard one, don't get me wrong, it's hard for me too, is taking it from a perspective of, I'm not going to convince you at the end of our conversation that you need to add, 2 shots of cream to your coffee every morning. Instead, it's merely about, this is what I do. If that works with the things that you value, then great. If it doesn't, then also great, because fortunately, I also grow the soybeans that could go into your soy milk. So whatever, it doesn't matter to me. But no, it's not even that. It really is about making sure that they have that opportunity to make their own decisions. And we just come at it from a perspective of, we're going to share information. You can trust my information. I'm not going to say you like everything I say or do, but at least you can trust it because I'm always going to tell you the truth and be honest about those kinds of things.
Gone are the days where we produce, we grow the crops, we produce the livestock, and this is what we supply to the market. There's much more about now, what is the market asking us for? What do consumers want? This is a conversation that took place a few years ago. I was talking to someone who was in the greenhouse industry, and his father had been involved in growing tomatoes for the Ontario market. And if you go back 40, 50 years ago, the tomatoes that came out this time of year, they were pink, and if you dropped them, they might bounce, but they wouldn't bruise because they were too hard, and wasn't a whole lot of juice in them. They were pretty tough. He says, if you put that out on the market now, you'll never sell it. It's just the consumer says, we don't want that. We want a tomato that tastes like the tomato that came out of my garden.
Yeah, and that really then kind of leaves us in the industry really needing to be open to, and I'm not saying it's necessarily open to change all the time, but at least be open to, what are the concerns and how can I help you feel more comfortable about that? I look at the dairy side, and one great example is around dehorning. Dehorning has been a concern, certainly from the animal welfare perspective, for quite a while. I don't know how many, it might have been 15 years ago that there was this great letter writing campaign of all these celebrities. This should be banned, and what can we do about it and all that. And if we just sat back and ignored it completely, I think we'd be facing more challenges than when we say, okay, what we've done to evolve since then is come up with protocols that if that animal is being dehorned, then we need pain killers, we need freezing, we need, certain steps. And here we're going to prove that we're going to do that. Or at the same breath, say, but we're also, and probably in the not too distant future, the Holstein breed is going to be a polled breed. And wouldn't that be something to completely take that concern off the table? And a lot of that comes from not because the polled genetics were the star genetics of the breed. That is not why. It came from a sense of, here's the consumer concern. How can we do a better job to make sure they continue to be comfortable and confident in the product we're doing? And, that's just one example in dairy. We can talk for days about all the things that every other sector has done, sometimes at a small scale and sometimes as kind of, a whole industry approach.
Some of the problem that we run into, though, and this gets back to telling our story there, it's no good to make the changes. And as you say, the Holstein breed becomes a polled breed, where 15 years ago, major issue was dehorning. Well, it doesn't do us any good if we don't tell the story and let people know that, hey, that's not how it's done. It's not done the same way that it was done 15 years ago. And if we don't, they're not going to know. The consumer will not know that we've changed how we do things in response to what they've asked for.
Oh, Mike, that is one of the things that I think about quite often, is because, man, you want us to brag about things that we've done on the farm?
Not in our nature.
Not in our nature. It is not at all. And it has been something I've thought about, over the years on and off, is how do we do a better job of that? Because if you turn on the TV or turn on the radio or do whatever, there are organizations that spend tens of millions of dollars bragging about what they do. And not to say that they're not doing it, for good reason. I'm not saying that, but it is that they then also invest and say, we do good. That is one thing that we have not been good at. And I would challenge that we're still not very good at, is saying we're going to do something. We do it all the time. But then nobody ever puts budget after that to say, how can we brag about it? And even if it's a subtle brag, how can we do that? And that's one thing that I think we all have to, and our organizations have to, and everybody in the value chain has to think about, is how do we shave off, even 5% of a budget to, overhaul something and say, okay, this is going to be for marketing. We have to make sure everybody knows about it. I think that's one thing we do have to take more serious.
The ads that the dairy farmers have on the television now, and they don't talk about the product. They talk about what the farm is like, and they show pictures of an active farm that is a modernized, and yet they're focusing on the family there, and they're focusing on what they really do well. And it's a great, good news story that we don't see nearly enough of on regular media or even on social media.
Well, and it is one thing that, from seeing some of the data behind some of those ads, it comes from a couple of places. Is one, just doing focus groups. That's another thing that we in agriculture don't do a lot on, is asking the consumer what's important to you. And so some of that stuff came from the fact that the organization went to consumers and said, what's important to you? And then tailored some of that advertising back. And then the other part, I think, comes from, I know there were criticisms, or have been in the past, about you're only showing cows on pasture. You're only showing, heifers out in the sun, when it's not as common as it once was, certainly for a whole herd to be out. And then recognizing that man, actually a modern dairy farm has some pretty good looking cows in it and they look comfortable. And we can very easily tell a story about why this is better for the animal. And all of a sudden you kind of go back and say, oh yeah, that makes sense to add that component in too. And that's where you get those. Now, it is one of those challenges of it's always hard to find the budget to do these types of things. But I think what we have to understand is that so many of our competitors, so many of even our global competitors, they're investing in these types of things. They're investing in the marketing. Going back to dairy, we sell milk. And if you think about the beverage category, it would throw me on a floor to know what is spent in marketing in the beverage category. Man, if we don't as producers take a role in that, and guess what every other group is doing, because you can absolutely believe that on beef, for example, how many commercials do you see about imitation meats? They're spending money because they believe they need to. And if we don't do some of that too, then I truly do believe that we're going to be behind and trying to catch up.
It's very important to keep your story out in front of people. It's easier to fool somebody than it is to convince people that they've been fooled. And that's all about who gets to control that narrative, who starts that conversation. And if we're playing catch up, you have a much harder job to convince people of your story.
You do. And I think the kind of the beef side and the meat side, this conversation around environmental sustainability, I think we're falling behind the 8 ball, in terms of people thinking that, well, I'm doing better for the environment if I don't eat as much meat. Well, where are they getting that idea? They're getting that idea from the people who are selling the not meat. Like, of course, that's the type of stuff they're talking about. We have to come back to the table and say, okay, we know what you've heard lately. Let's set the record straight. Because one of the really great things and one of the benefits we have is, as we talked about before, is farmers are trusted, believed. So already we come from kind of a place a little bit ahead of a starting line here. But then the other side is that nothing beats a steak. Nothing beats bacon. Butter is delicious. Like, it's not, I do think that once we can make a consumer comfortable with it, going back to that it tastes good category, like, it wins every time. Haven't had a fake steak for a long time, but it was not good the last time I had it. And I would always choose a steak. It's just making sure that everybody else is comfortable enough that they'll choose it too.
Right. You say going back to the table and making sure we get our story out there. A lot of farmers will say, you know what, this isn't my thing. I don't know how I do that. I don't have time. I'm worried what happens if I do engage with someone on social media that is an activist, and I don't know how to handle that. What happens there? What do you say to someone like that, and how do you encourage them to get involved?
Well, I certainly think that you have to be comfortable doing these types of things. I certainly do not want to give the impression that everybody needs to be on social media and posting everything you see around the farm. You have to be comfortable doing what it is you want to do. So, as I said, social media has been one that I like. You talked about going into the high school. We've crossed paths even in university lecture halls going through different classes, because that's another one that, we're comfortable with, and some other people might find that more comfortable. Pandemic obviously makes it more complicated, but when we come out of this, I think about all those farmers that aren't on social media in our community, but take that animal to the fair for the ag in the classroom day, for the kids to see what a sheep looks like, see what a beef cow looks like, see all of these things. That's a way to do it. At the end of the day, I think if really you don't want to do any of this at all, then write a check. Quite frankly, we've got some really great organizations in Canada, especially here in Ontario, are really trying to do good work, whether it's Agscape, in classroom settings, whether it's farm and food care, in more public settings. There's lots of other groups, even, your local fair board doing ag in the classroom, whatever it is. Most of this work is not free to do. It takes dollars to be able to get agriculture information and farm information in front of eyeballs. If doing something isn't necessarily your thing, then pick an organization and write a check every once in a while and say, you know what, it's not for me, but I'd really like to support those that are trying to do it. And I think that goes a long way.
Never seems to be enough time when we start talking about this. We could spend a long time having this discussion. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. We've been listening to Andrew Campbell, the Fresh Air Farmer. Andrew, if people aren't familiar with where you are on the internet and on social media, how can they find you?
Fresh Air Farmer is definitely the spot, whether it's on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or YouTube again. Any of those things, if you just search Fresh Air Farmer in any of those platforms, you'll find us.
It's been great to talk to you today. Thank you for spending some time with us. You've been listening to The Back 40, brought to you by Trillium Mutual. Join us next time on The Back 40 when our guest is Pierre-Andre Meunier, owner and founder of PrevTech Innovations. You've been listening to The Back 40, brought to you by Trillium Mutual Insurance. Be sure to subscribe to The Back 40 wherever you find your favorite podcasts so that you don't miss an episode. We're on Spotify, Audible, Google, Apple, and Amazon Podcasts. The Back 40, bringing the ag community together one podcast at a time. I'm Mike Brine. Until next time, take care and stay safe.